We're from the government and we have a problem. We already don't have enough food to feed everyone, but by the year 2030 there'll be 9.5 billion people. So what are we going to do?
You, as Britain's most noted scientist, have been recruited by us to come up with our solution. Will, what's yours?
Dr. Jonathan Napier has studied that plants that we think give us oils, like flux, actually don't, and it's the algae that the fish eat that give us the fish oils. He's found a way of creating a plant that gives us these oils without us actually having to deplete our fish supply.
What I'm going to tell you about is the work that we've been doing on omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, which the shorthand for which is fish oils. And fish oils are important for a whole range of reasons, of which some are quite literally partially outlined on this slide. In that so the reason that we're interested in is that omega-3 fish oils are health protective. They're an important part of our diet, and so they're really they're compounds that you see in lots of food ingredients that are available in the supermarkets. And they're also, as I'll tell you in a moment, ingredients in animal feeds. Now the problem is that the omega-3s that we all consume, and we have to consume because they're an essential component of our diet, are basically a diminishing natural resource. So the omega-3s, these fish oils from the oceans, are not sourced in a sustainable fashion, which this is a slightly controversial statement. When I talk about not sourced in a sustainable fashion, if there's anybody usually from the fishing industry, they go completely ape when I make that statement. They prefer to use the phrase that I think is being sourced sustainably at a maximum level or something like that, which is a euphemism for taking as much as you can without getting sort of shouted at. But anyway, I think we'd all agree that there is problems with overfishing, and fish stocks is a big issue. There's also and that's why if you're omega-3s, if you say that omega-3s are all coming out of the oceans, then so we need to think about how we source them. The marine environment, I'm sure lots of people are also aware, the marine environment, so where fish oils obviously come from, suffers from pollution which accumulates in the food web. So there's problems with things like heavy metals like mercuries and dioxins and other unpleasant things actually accumulating in these food webs, which then get accumulated into fish and fish oils. So there's a problem with food safety in terms of the ultimate end product can end up being contaminated. And that caused problems with supply chains and the security of sustainability. And so also the omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids that we find in fish oils are absolutely not the same thing as the omega-3 fatty acids you find in plant oils. There's some I would argue, almost what's the word I'm just going to look for without being too controversial? I would say not, well, there's lots of things you see in the supermarket that are labeled as saying high in omega-3 fatty acids. And usually, in a lot of cases, those omega-3 fatty acids are derived from vegetable oil. So they're just derived from linseed or flax oil or something like that. Unfortunately, linseed and flax oil it's rich in omega-3 fatty acids. It's not rich in these particular type of omega-3 fatty acids. And more importantly, and this is the bit that I think is really really cheeky, those plant omega-3 fatty acids do not give you any health benefits. So anybody who tells you can get health benefits from eating flaxseed or linseed is talking rubbish.
Not bad. Kieran?
Stephen Long is re-engineering plants by using biotechnology and computers. They look for components which develop the productivity within plants the best, and step by step they are tweaking the DNA strands till they have max productivity.
Max?
Improving productivity by Sumitra Krupp. Plants use their leaves to absorb light for photosynthesis, but the leaves are not efficient as they could be. They have layers like the laminar wax layer, which is a protective layer to help with water stress. However, leaves also have layers like the apicular wax layer, which reflects light. In the experiment that Sumitra did, the plant reflected blue light. Sumitra thought, why not use the light to increase the rate of photosynthesis? Even with low levels of photosynthesis, the crop yield could increase by 5 to 15%. It also has advantages, like it can help with pathogen resistance. With the reduction of cuticular wax layer, the predators can move across the surface to get the pathogens quicker and more efficiently. There haven't been any disadvantages found yet. It all seems to be mostly advantages, but it's early work in progress.
So I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of recent research that I've started, which is on waxes in plants. And what happened was I worked both on fundamental model plants, as the Arabidopsis, and also brassicas. And in brassicas, when we were looking at the plants, what we found is a lot of plants, including brassicas, have what we call waxes. So the leaf of a plant, if you go into your garden, you will see there are some plants that look quite green in color and some that have a bluish haze on them. What plants have is, on top of the cuticle or the top layer, they have a layer of laminar wax. Now this is normal, every plant has it, and the idea of the laminar wax is it helps protect the plant, helps with water stress, etc. Some plants, in addition to this flat layer or laminar wax, have a crystalline layer of wax which we call epicuticular wax. This epicuticular wax is what gives it that bluish color because it reflects a lot of the blue light. And what we got around to thinking was, why does the plant need this extra layer of wax crystals? Does it have any real benefit to it? Because we thought, well, if it's reflecting a lot of light back, that is light that the plant could absorb. And as you know, plants need light for photosynthesis. So my colleague Fred and I, when we started discussing this issue, we thought, well, this is interesting. Is it possible that we could somehow reduce this cuticular wax layer? And what would be the effect on the plant? Our idea was that there would be increased light into the plant, and therefore a higher level of photosynthesis, higher photosynthesis should give you higher yield. So we did this as a pilot experiment. So we were working on brassicas, and we took a brassica plant, and what we did was, you can use good imaging techniques to really look at this wax crystalline layer, and it really looks like a sort of skyscraper. When you see a scene of New York skyline, it really looks like that. These are these crystals of wax which is on top of the surface of a leaf. And what we did was, mechanically we removed this layer of wax, and then we use a machine which measures photosynthetic rate. And when we put that on, at different light levels, we saw that the rate of photosynthesis increased by up to 15%. And now this percentage was even more obvious at lower light levels, which is interesting if you imagine we live in Northern Europe. Northern Europe, as you well know, our summers are very cloudy. We don't get very high levels of sunlight sometimes. So the fact that even when light levels are quite low in nature, the idea is the plant could absorb more light and convert that into photosynthetic carbon. And what will happen is, eventually, if you have saturating light, I think the level of photosynthesis would be equal whether you had your waxes or not. And that was what we discovered. We found that it was amazing that at very low levels of light also, the photosynthesis could go up anywhere between 5 and 15%. And this photosynthesis, we hope, will now get converted into, in brassica, we are looking to convert it into oil in the seed, which would mean we could increase the oil in brassica or canola seed by up to 15%, which would be, 15% sounds low, but when you think that a brassica plant, Brassica napus, makes about 50% oil in the seed, increasing that to 65-70% would be a big economic boost to farmers who grow them.
That's very detailed. Thank you, Max. Will?
Giles Oldroyd has been trying to find an alternative for nitrogen fertilisers. He's found that there's little nitrogen-producing nodules on the roots of legume plants, which produce all the nitrogen they need to grow. He's trying to find a way of transferring these nodules onto the roots of cereal crops, such as wheat and barley, so it greatly reduces the amount of nitrogen fertilisers they need to put into the soil.
One of the world's top GM research centres is based right here in the UK.
You wouldn't think it to see all these light bulbs, switches and dials, but this place is actually dedicated to plants and agriculture. Out there in rural Norfolk are some of the country's most experienced farmers. But in here, at the John Innes Research Centre, they're looking at farming well into the future.
Giles Oldroyd is trying to create new crops that will be less reliant on the chemicals that lie at the heart of intensive farming. In this experiment, he's trying to take the nitrogen-producing ability from pea plants and transfer them into wheat plants, reducing the need for nitrogen fertiliser.
This is a pea plant. On the roots of the plant, they have what we call nodules, and within those nodules are these pink structures on the roots. They,
these little pink dots.
yes, exactly. So those nodules are basically nitrogen factories, and they are supplying all of the nitrogen the plant needs for its growth. And in other plants that are incapable of doing this, they have to capture that nitrogen from the soil, and in our agricultural processes, we provide that nitrogen as nitrogenous fertilizer.
Nitrogen-based fertilizers can increase crop yields by up to a half, so they're an essential part of the global food supply we all depend on. But the costs of using these oil-based fertilizers are likely to rocket over the coming decades because oil itself will become more expensive. There's also an environmental cost to using chemical fertilizers. There's already evidence of nitrogen poisoning affecting soils and seas across the world. For Giles Oldroyd, these are all compelling arguments to push ahead with the kind of GM research program he is spearheading.
I can sort of understand your logic. You take this nitrogen factory from the pea plant and you put it into a wheat plant. Bingo, you got it. But I'm not sure that we understand all the interactions that might take place once it's there. Do you see what I mean? There's an unpredictability about it all.
There's not an unpredictability in that we don't know what effect it will have on wheat. Science, by definition, is predictable because it's not that we're just randomly taking a gene out of pea and putting it into wheat and asking what happens. We're actually very carefully, very thoroughly trying to understand the process in the pea plant. And then, with that knowledge and with that understanding, taking that into wheat. What we do know is the effect of nitrogen fertilizers. We do know that they cause death zones in the Gulf of Mexico. We do know that they're using huge amounts of fossil fuels, and yet we do them anyway. If this is a natural and biological solution to that, what you're saying is we should not do it because of this perceived unpredictability.
What do you say to those who would argue that what you're doing here is unnatural, it's acting against nature?
I would argue it's entirely the opposite. We're facing depleting natural resources, depleting fossil fuel reserves. We're facing expansion in the population to 9.5 billion. And we're facing climate change. And this is all going to happen within our lifetime. And if we are going to survive until 2050, without going into major wars and without having mass starvation, we simply have to accept that we're going to have to use this technology.
Having listened to those on both sides of the argument, it feels to me as if the public debate on GM has got stuck, too often portrayed as if it were a struggle between mega corporations and the small farmer, or between Frankenstein science and nature. And the trouble with such polarized views is that it's prevented a proper, informed debate about a science that could help feed the world.
We need you to decide on and research one of these 4 projects.